Hi, everybody. I think we're just letting folks trickle in. Well, perhaps we should go ahead and get started. I'm Fiona Danaher. I'm director of the NGH Center for Immigrant Health. I apologize, I'm losing my voice. Thank you all so much for joining us for day 3 of our Migration is Beautiful campaign. We're incredibly excited to have an amazing panel today to talk to us about legislative advocacy for immigrant health. I'll pass it over to Kate Froelich from MIRA, who has been coordinating this, and let her do introductions.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Froelich. I'm from the MIRA Coalition. I'm the Legislative Campaign Director. We are so excited to be here today to share this all. I am going to pass it to Maria, who's going to start with introducing herself.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Rosario Gonzalez Albuquerque. I am the Director of Communications and Immigrant Health at the nonprofit organization Healthcare for All. And today I'm actually representing one of the coalitions, the many coalitions that we lead and work with. And that coalition is the Children's Health Access Coalition, or CHAC, as we all know it. And that's what I'm going to share about myself, because we have plenty of things to talk about later.
And I'm happy to go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Rush. I'm the Research and Policy Associate at the Massachusetts Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, a nonprofit research and advocacy group. And I am here representing the Language Access for All Coalition, and really excited to talk about that with everybody today. Thank you so much for having me.
I always forget to take myself off mute. My name is Amy Grunder, and I direct legislative affairs and state policy at the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. And as in that role, I lead our advocacy on state legislation and policy, working with lawmakers and community advocates to advance rights and opportunities for immigrants and refugees in Massachusetts. And I lead my organization's legislative advocacy for the Safe Communities Act, which you'll hear about later today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Murrieta Ruiz. I am the daughter of immigrants from Mexico, and I am also a political coordinator at the labor union, SCIU 32BJ. We represent security guards as well as janitors, largely made up of Black, Brown, and immigrant workers. And I am here today representing the Driving Families Forward Coalition.
Great. Thank you all so much. And I apologize. I am also kind of losing my voice, so it might be a little scratchy here and there. I'm going to start with just a brief overview of the state legislative process in Massachusetts, and then we are going to go into an overview of each bill. There'll be opportunity for questions following each overview of each bill, and then we'll have a moment to introduce some action items at the end. So the Massachusetts state legislative process, we have a 2-year legislative cycle here in Massachusetts. The current session began last January 2021. Bills are drafted with the lead sponsors by organizations, people, legislators. They're filed by the 3rd Friday in January. And then there's a drive for co-sponsorship. So legislators to sign on and say, add their name to the bill in support. So that's a big period. Then the bills are assigned to a relevant joint committee that will handle the subject matter. So there's public safety and homeland security. There's the joint committee on the judiciary, all sorts of joint committees. Then advocacy begins. There's legislative briefings, meetings with legislators, calls by constituents, emails, endorsements, etc. A lot of work. During that first year of the session, there is a public hearing. Usually it's that first year. At that point, there is a lot of public testimony in front of the committee, both for and against the bill, oral and written. And I know Dr. Fiona Danaher testified 2 weeks ago for the Safe Communities Act. So a lot of different people are involved and testify. Then we enter the second year of the session. There is a day called the Joint Rule 10 deadline, which is coming up on February 2nd. And at that point, the Joint Committee either will recommend the bill as ought to pass, recommend it not to pass, recommend that the bill be sent to study, or if there's both a House and a Senate bill, they could act on either one. If the bill survives, if they recommend it ought to pass, the bill will advance to the next joint committee if there's another one, and ultimately will go to the Ways and Means Committee in either the House or the Senate. If it's released, there's a lot of ifs, a lot of steps in this process. If it's released, it's brought to the floor of either chamber for a debate and a vote. If it's ultimately passed in one of the two chambers, House or the Senate, it goes to the other one where the process is repeated. Once it's passed in both the House and the Senate, it's going to go to a conference committee to negotiate out the final bill. Then the conference committee will release the final bill. Both the House and Senate have to vote on it again. Then it goes to the governor for signature. The governor will then have 10 days to sign it or veto it and send it back, in which they can override it with a 2/3 vote. So if a bill is sent to study, which is pretty common in the state, oftentimes that's kind of the end of the road. But then there's also the opportunity to include it in the state budget, which is the only piece of legislation that the legislature has to pass every year. So that happens in the spring. And one way to pass a bill is to get it adopted as an outside section to the budget. This happened with the Safe Communities Act in 2018. It happened with a significant piece of reproductive rights legislation last year. It is something that does happen. So that is kind of a very brief, quick overview of the legislature. There are a number of ways to plug in and take action and persuade legislators to support or not to support a certain piece of legislation. And we're going to do a little overview of 4 different pieces of legislation now. And I'm going to pass it to Maria, who's going to talk about the Cover All Kids legislation.
Thank you so much, Kate. So I'm talking on behalf of the Children's Health Access Coalition, one of the priority bills for this coalition for healthcare for all. And I know that Mira is also part of this group, and many of the organizations actually represented today is this Cover All Kids bill. So what does this do? This bill really expand mass health coverage for kids who are not eligible for mass health based solely on their immigration status. That is like really the technical part of the bill is really expanding in this mass health program by removing that immigration barrier. We think there's around 30,000 children and young adults who could benefit from this bill. And if we go to the next. The two sponsors, the two lead sponsors are Representative Dave Rogers and Senator Sal DiDomenico. I do have to say that at this point, you guys have now learned how the process works. This bill is now in the, the House bill has been attached to the Senate bill, and now it has been reported favorably from the Joint Committee on Healthcare Financing to the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. So it's now in the Senate Committee of Ways and Means. So it's really a Senate bill at this point. Now, when we talk about expanding coverage to mass health coverage for kids, you may think, well, Massachusetts has many programs. Most children have access to care. We brag about how 98% of our children have some kind of health coverage. However, the truth is that we estimate that around 30,000 children who have some limited programs may not be able to access all the needs, all the services that they actually need, including 1,650 of kids who have actually some kind of disability and have special needs. So we don't think that the needs of these children are being met with the current programs that we have. And we always kind of like say that Massachusetts is the first one in healthcare. The truth is that many other states have already passed legislation to expand coverage for children, including California, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, New York, and Washington, D.C. And I think it's just about time that Massachusetts does the right thing. You want to go next? And as I said, the only barrier that we see here is the immigration status. We think that they should not be paying for like having an immigration status that does not fit the bill. And then, you know, the kind of programs that they can access right now include Children's Medical Security Plan and Health Safety Net. And these are good programs, but they have a lot of limitations. If you want to go next. And I know that there's a little bit of energy this year. Last year, we were trying to figure out how to move forward because there's a cost estimate that is really like, it's a barrier because this will cost money to expand the program. And the other issue is we were really struggling to see if we should focus on the 30,000 kids who need further coverage, or if we should just like target those children with disabilities that are the high needs children. So originally we had two bills, but now it looks like that there's momentum. So we're really like pushing for the comprehensive bill that would impact all children. We think that that is the right thing to do. We also say that this is a matter of health equity. These are low income children who are paying the price for coming to the country or being brought to the country without proper documentation. That is just, I don't think, we see this not just as a health equity issue, but as a moral issue. And as I said, we think that there's some momentum, there's some energy in pushing this forward. And I think the pandemic has exacerbated so many inequities. But this is a way of really helping a very targeted, very needy part of our population to access the healthcare they need. And I think we're going to open it up for questions on this bill now. No questions? Or is there any questions on the chat? I don't see any questions. I can also give a couple of examples if this is something that you guys don't understand. Let me know. I know that many of the providers have testified. We did the hearing back in July. And some of you have shared stories, some of them very powerful. We see stories with kids who need behavioral health services. There's some limitations there. There's limitations with prescription drugs. There's limitations to like hospitalizations and so forth. So you can imagine how much of an impact this bill can make.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Maria Rios. I just joined MGB, actually, the government affairs team. And I was curious, you said that this bill is currently in the Senate Ways and Means. Will there be any other opportunities in this part of the session to provide more testimony, or is it really like that part is over for the process?
We can provide written testimony still. Correct me if I'm wrong,
can.
Amy, but like we are able to provide written testimony.
You
And
provide
what we
until
were
the committee takes action, you can do it, right?
Correct.
So if they decide not to apply the deadline, give an extension, you can still submit testimony, right?
Correct. And I think the call to action right now is really reaching out to your senators to tell them to connect with the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and specifically with the chair of the committee, Roderick, to ask them to report the bill favorably and send it to the floor. What you really want is the bill to go to the floor so that there's a vote that is on the record. That is something powerful for all of us. So that is the ask right now, but yes, written testimony can still be submitted. Great question. Any other question on this? Great.
Great, we'll pass it off to Melanie.
So hi, everybody. Again, Melanie Rush, pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm here representing the Language Access for All Coalition, which is leading an effort to pass an act relative to language access and inclusion. In the Senate, it is led by Senator DiDomenico, and the House by Representative Modero. And I kind of want to talk, I'm sure this is something that you are all aware of, but why do we need a bill like this? So this is essentially a comprehensive language access statute. And the reason we need something like this is because, as many of you know, Massachusetts is very diverse. We have almost 1 in 10 residents who speak a primary language other than English. And there are federal protections that should provide that, if they're involved with any type of government agency, service, or program, that they are entitled to receiving supports in their own language, whether that's interpretation, vital documents, any type of services that are offered. But unfortunately, at the federal level, that's not really being actively enforced in Massachusetts. And at the state level, there are some protections as well through executive orders. But again, there's really not a lot of enforcement mechanism ensuring that interpreters are being provided, that vital documents are being provided in common languages. And that's obviously a very large problem that has very real consequences for, again, almost 10% of our population. So Massachusetts Appleseed, my organization, kind of comes to this work, particularly through a study that we looked at of language access failures at the Department of Children and Families, which I know many of your patients might be involved with, and found that there was some very severe concerns with the way that families that were limited English proficient weren't being provided services and documents in their language. They were ultimately more likely to be separated, which is obviously horrendous and something that we don't want to see happening. And we know that this occurs at all different types of really, really essential state agencies like the Department of Unemployment, Housing, Transitional Assistance. And obviously the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of these disparities. But there is something that we can do on the state level, and 5 other states and Washington, D.C. have already passed comprehensive language access statutes to try to address some of those own barriers in their states, and that's what this bill is trying to do. And so essentially, like I said, what this bill would do is standardize and enforce language access policies and protocols at public-facing state agencies, ensuring that if you are limited English proficient or non-English speaking, that you can really get the services that you need. And I'm going to sort of walk through the provisions of the bill relatively quickly, but I just want you all to understand how we're actually trying to achieve this increased language access. So these are the 5 here, and there'll be a slide for each of those as we go forward. So communications with the public would be guaranteed to be providing language access services under this bill. So oral interpretation would be guaranteed for every single limited English proficient person under the bill. And that's something that federal law already requires, but we would be reiterating that. We would also require increased vital document translation and translation of all public-facing state agency websites. The number or way that we're actually calculating how many languages are going to be in here is still a little bit up in the air, as this bill is currently had its hearing. It is with the Committee for State Administration and Regulatory Oversight, and we're in conversations with them about how to make sure that those languages that are identified, particularly for vital document translation, are picked most effectively, and if there's ways that we can allow for regional specificity across the state, because we know in some areas, certain languages that might be less common are more prevalent. And the other opportunity that we want to make sure here is that, and it specifies this in the bill, if you speak a language that isn't one of those 8 or 10 or 15 or however many it is, we specify that an interpreter is required to read those documents to you orally. So you will still have access to that essential information, even if it's not written in your primary language. Another really important piece of the bill is around language access plans. So these are documents that some agencies already have that are really supposed to spell out how these services are implemented in practice, but there really aren't any, legal standards in Massachusetts for how comprehensive those need to be and what needs to be included. And so some are more helpful than others. Many, as I'm sure you would all surmise, are not particularly helpful. And so this bill would provide minimum standards for those plans and actually require the Office of Access and Opportunity to review those and make sure that those are being implemented. That's an executive office that's supposed to work on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the state. And the language access plans would also create a language survey that agencies would have to do regionally every 2 years to make sure that they are actually serving the people in their area correctly, and that as those populations change, they're meeting those needs. Another piece of this bill focuses on personnel. So some agencies, most in Massachusetts, do have a language access coordinator, which is great because you want someone to actually oversee the implementation of all of these policies. But in a lot of agencies, there are language access coordinators that are also the diversity coordinator or the ADA coordinator, and it all gets a little bit jumbled and no one is really prioritizing language access. So this bill would make sure that those coordinators are really required to work on only language access, and it would create positions of regional coordinators who can work with them to actually make sure that those regional specificities within different areas of the state are being correctly addressed. And it would also require sufficient numbers of bilingual employees in public contact positions and interpreters at these local levels, and kind of provide different qualifications for who can be an interpreter, who can just be someone that might be a bilingual staff member, that can have casual conversations, but can't be, interpreting in rights-bearing situations. And this bill would also create a language access advisory board, because we know that on its own, this bill, even if it's passed, is just words on paper, and we need to make sure that, again, one of the issues with existing standards is that there's no enforcement mechanism. So this would create a board with members directly of limited English proficient communities and their representatives, in addition to legislators, the Attorney General's office, the Commission Against Discrimination, legal service providers, other community advocacy groups, and allow them to actually assist those experts and those people with lived experience, assist with technical assistance. And this committee would also submit a report on how that is going. And then finally, how is this actually going to happen? How is this going to be implemented? So it initially apply to 9 essential public-facing state agencies in the first year, expand over 5 years to include all executive agencies, and the Offices of Access and Opportunity, as I mentioned, would be tasked with implementation. And there is also a provision in the bill for relief. So if the provisions of the bill still aren't being met, it would allow someone to go to court directly on a language access claim, which currently you can't do. So it allows for multiple opportunities, again, for enforcement in a way that our existing laws don't do. So I know I just went through all of that very quickly. Happy to answer any questions. Hopefully I didn't go too over time. And I'm happy to put some information about the chat if you're interested in joining our coalition or getting involved. And I know there's some action items at the end for anyone that wants to act directly. So thank you very much.
Melanie, I'm Chris Kerwin. I'm the Director of Interpreter Services at Mass General. Thank you for this. This is fantastic. One of the things that we're looking at in our real data from Mass General is that over the past 2 years, we've seen a drastic increase in the number of patients who have limited English proficiency, who have appointments at Mass General. And this past year, it jumped by 25%. So since 2014, we went from almost 200,000 encounters to last year having 400,000 encounters. Now, just a question about the 2020 census, and I know things are coming out very slowly on the 2020 census. Do you have any sense on the estimate of the population of Massachusetts as regards to people with limited English proficiency and how much that's grown?
That is a great question. And I don't know if someone else on this panel does. Yeah, I don't have the most recent information. I think, as you said, the census can be very difficult. And we're actually having some conversations right now about, in making decisions about which languages are going to be, most directly required for vital documents, can we even rely on the census as an indicator for language populations? Because there are a lot of flaws in that. So I don't have a great answer. I think what you shared is really, really interesting and important. And I would look to my fellow panelists if any of you have any either anecdotal or otherwise. So yeah, Amy, feel free to jump in.
Hi there. So yeah, Chris, I mean, I think there was a report recently, a news report over the last year that said I think it was over the last 2 years, if I remember correctly, Massachusetts was, and I could be getting this completely wrong, it could be over 10 years, but Massachusetts was the only state in New England to actually have population growth. And all of that was from immigration, right? So, right. So a lot of people are leaving New England for cost and a lot of other reasons. We also know that there are a lot of immigrants making their way to places like Chelsea from the border because they have communities and family members who are already there. But I would suggest there may be another reason why you had such a large number of contacts, and it might have had something to do with the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on immigrants, which of course meant that a lot of people needed to have care that weren't getting care before. I don't know which kind of patients, whether you're talking about, the emergency room or what, but that is something that happened. And I know Dr. Danaher can say more about that.
Yeah, we definitely saw that during the first year, but after 2020, that volume subsided. And the larger increase was over this past year, and it was non-COVID related illnesses. So very interesting patterns developing.
Was it after the Biden administration was elected?
Yes, that, it sort of coincided with the new administration coming in and that first wave of COVID subsiding.
Yeah, I'll be talking a little bit about the impact of federal immigration enforcement on seeking of medical care in my portion.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good segue into the Safe Communities Act and Amy, if you want to go.
Sure. Okay. So so the purpose of the Safe Communities Act is to draw a clear line between local actors like local police, local law enforcement, and federal immigration agents, and allow immigrants who call Massachusetts home to be able to seek protection from abuse and exploitation without fear of deportation. Specifically, what the bill would do is end the longstanding involvement of local police, courts, and correctional facilities in civil immigration matters and create a uniform standard guiding their interactions with ICE. And it would also protect basic rights. But I wanted to say something about, I wanted to start with, I'm blocking my own view of the, I wanted to start with a little bit of history of our local involvement with ICE. This history begins in 1996 under the Clinton administration, actually, when Congress created ways to leverage the local criminal justice system as a force multiplier for ICE in response to a social narrative that criminalizes people of color and, of course, including immigrants of color. That was the same period of time these policies began in 1996, right? There was also the welfare reform at that time. The 3 strikes you're out, I believe, was around that time. So these things all happened together and need to be seen in that context. It began, as I said, in 1996 with the creation of something called the 287G program, which actually deputizes local authorities with powers that they wouldn't normally have to identify people for deportation and put them in the system. And then in 2008, we got a new policy called Secure Communities, not to be confused with the Safe Communities Act. What Secure Communities did was, and that was under the Bush administration, but it really took off under the Obama administration. And believe it or not, it was piloted in Boston in 2008, and then became generalized across the United States in, I believe, 2010 or 2012. And what this was, you can flip to the next slide, Kate, but I'm not sure. Yeah, this is fine. So what this was was this was a policy by which anyone who's arrested, and that includes everybody here participating in this conversation, anyone who's arrested, instead of their information, when they're fingerprinted, those are called biometric fingerprints, when they're sent to the FBI, they set up a system of interoperability with ICE. So the FBI would share immediately with ICE, and then ICE would come back and say, okay, they would come back if they were interested in the person, right? Because they were in their database, or maybe because they weren't in their database and they had a foreign sounding name, right? There was no judicial review of this, but they would come back and ask the police to hold that person, or ask the court to hold that person past the time that they're eligible for release. And this is called an immigration detainer. And it was subsequently ruled illegal to respond to in Massachusetts by the Supreme Judicial Court, because it's basically a civil arrest, because deportation proceedings are civil, right? But there are lots of other ways that cooperation continued even after this ended. But when this system came into place, what happened was, the consequences were that if you think that your police, or if you go to court for a restraining order, for example, or if you call the police, or you call 911 and the police come, if you think that they're involved with deportation, you're not going to call them, right? And so the consequence was that it made immigrants incredibly vulnerable to exploitation and crime from, landlords, employers, I'm trying to think, employers, abusive partners, other people who would target immigrants and just basically say, yeah, go ahead, call the police. You'll see what happens to you, and this has been a big issue for workers, immigrant worker centers, and also people who advocates who work with survivors, immigrant survivors of domestic violence, who are, by the way, twice as likely to die in that situation as someone who's native born. So this creates a public health problem and a public health, safety problem. The other thing is, since so many immigrants also don't distinguish between one institution or another, or what's governmental, what's quasi-governmental, and also because of the fact that many immigrants, this is especially true in Latin America, come from countries where the hospital itself is government owned, then immigrants become less willing. Immigrants who are have concerns about deportation or family members being deported are less likely to share information with hospitals and other healthcare providers, right? So that's something else that physicians in our network saw. So in response, you can go to the next one. In response, advocates, first of all, there was a proliferation of local, what are called trust acts. There was one in Boston, Lawrence, Cambridge, Somerville. They were also called Sanctuary City. They started to be called Sanctuary City ordinances and policies. That's another word for them. But we decided then the next thing that happened was Trump got elected. And so we saw the writing on the wall. California had already passed pretty comprehensive legislation separating immigration enforcement from law enforcement. And so we decided to try to do that in Massachusetts. There'd been a couple attempts with a smaller bill just targeting those ICE detainers I mentioned. But this was a comprehensive bill that would not address this through patchworks of different policies in every city and town in Massachusetts, but actually have one single standard, minimum standard for the whole state. And so that's what we did in 2017. We filed the Safe Communities Act. It's a pretty straightforward bill. And in fact, it incorporates input and best practices of law enforcement who work in immigrant communities, who work hard to improve their relationships with the immigrant communities they serve. And so this is the third session, and I'm going to run out of time. So this is the third session that the bill's been filed. It's currently before the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. And you see it has just four basic provisions. One is it prohibits questions about immigration status, which have a major chilling effect. People, you don't want the police arriving and asking questions about immigration status. That stops people from coming forward, and immigration status is irrelevant to crime, right? The other thing it protects basic rights by requiring something akin to a Miranda warning. So when someone is in police custody or court custody, ICE has access to them and will come and interview them. And people often don't even know that the person is an ICE agent or that they're getting an ICE interview. So this provision would require a warning. It would require a warning before any ICE interview can proceed, that the person knows it's an ICE interview, and also that they are informed that they have the right to decline an interview and to call their own lawyer, that sort of thing, or have a lawyer present. The third thing it would do is it would stop law enforcement, meaning courts, court officials or police officials generally, from notifying ICE when someone's about to be released, say on bail or on personal recognizance after a traffic offense, that sort of thing. It would stop them from alerting ICE so that ICE could be waiting outside the courtroom or outside the police station, which is something else that has happened, right? And then the last thing it would do is end these collaboration contracts I noted earlier that allow correctional personnel to act as ICE agents and at state taxpayer expense. And I can talk about any of these things. Someone has asked a question when we there's a question here, don't police see immigration status immediately when they access information? The answer is no. They send information, they get information from the crime database, and they see immigration status information only after it goes, it goes to ICE, and then if ICE contacts them, that's when they see the immigration status information. So that's the bill. And I guess I would just say, we've advanced every session. The first session, it was sent to study and we got it stuck in the budget, as was mentioned earlier, which was great. The second session, the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security did release it from committee with a favorable recommendation, but it got buried with hundreds of other bills at the end of the session because of the pandemic. Nobody was acting on much. And the other thing I'll say about last year is it did earn the endorsements of the Massachusetts Medical Society, the Mass League of Community Health Centers, MGH Chelsea Healthcare, MGH Revere Healthcare, and eCoach, the MGH eCoach, which I'm gonna mess up if I try to pronounce, and other actors in other institutional medical institutions and associations. And that's all I have. Thank you for now.
Any other questions for Amy?
I'm seeing a really interesting one here. Anastasia, anecdotally, she says when she went to traffic court for an administrative reason, the computer display said foreign national. Could be that information, could that have been in your license or your license application? That might be why traffic court would know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I assumed it was, through the state police, since they pull you over to give you tickets. It
would have to be information that they got from the RMV, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless they arrested you. They arrested you.
No, so I'm not, so I thought, they just had access to the fact like, oh, this person has a green card or.
No, they're not supposed to do that. Or they don't need to do that, but sometimes they do, which is part of the problem, right? Which is why people are afraid of the police if they have a compromised status or don't have status, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great, I'm gonna pass it to Crystal.
Thank you, Kate and Amy. I am going to be talking about the last bill of the program, and it is more commonly known as the driver's license bill, but our formal name is an act relative to work and family mobility. You can see that our lead sponsors in the House are Representative Harley Bouvier and Representative Barber, and in the Senate we have Senator Creighton and Gomez. And what does this bill do? This bill enables all qualified state residents to apply for a standard Massachusetts driver's license, regardless of their immigration status. You can go on to the next one. One thing that's really important to note, and I think you might be observing a pattern, is that many other states have done the work that we are hoping to accomplish through each of the bills that we presented today, right? And this is no exception. 16 other states have passed legislation similar to the driver's license bill that we are working on here in Massachusetts, right? And we're hopeful that Massachusetts can be the 17th state. If you look at the map, you can see which states have already done this, and you can also note some of the years in which legislation was implemented, right? 1993 being the first and oldest, so it's almost been 30 years that a bill of this sort has existed. The sky has not fallen, and people are able to thrive because of it. And you'll also see that there are the 3 highlighted or bolded states that you see that were able to get this bill done under the leadership of a Republican governor, which is similar to our situation here, at least for the remainder of this legislative session. And we're hopeful we'll get this done in this legislative session. We can come back really quick. So the bill really is requiring minimal changes to the way that things operate in the state of Massachusetts with the RMV. As of now, Massachusetts has a 2-tier identification or driver's license system. And you can see here, one of them is a real ID, and a real ID has that little golden star, and you can use that for federal purposes. So that would be to travel, to try to get on an airplane, or to get into a building, a federal building. And then you have a standard Massachusetts driver's license, such as the one that I have, which doesn't have that little star up, and people that would be able to have access to a driver's license would be eligible for that second one without the star. And of course, this would not say anywhere anything about their status. It would just not have that star, so it would not be a real ID. So mine would blend in just with theirs, right? And would not indicate whether I am or am not a US citizen. And what we really like to highlight with that is the fact that the RMV has all of the tools that it needs, and it's already been doing things, right, in line to be able to get this bill done. We can go on to the next one. Thank you. Why do we need this? One of the many reasons is because driving is essential to mobility. And I don't know about y'all, but I've especially been keen to this because of the pandemic. Before COVID-19, I did not have a car. I rode the T and the bus everywhere. During the pandemic, I was very fortunate to have a friend who lent me a spare car, you know, that made me feel more comfortable being able to go get groceries, right? To go get a COVID-19 test, to go get my vaccine eventually, right? And now I've been able to drive up to get COVID tested before I, you know, am planning to travel. And that is one of the many reasons why we need to get this done and why we want it to pass. And people even need it, you know, prior to COVID. A lot of the times, if you show up, let's say you have a child that has some medication that requires you to have an identification. If you are an undocumented immigrant in the state of Massachusetts and you don't have that, then you have to rely on your circle, your networks, your loved ones to be able to pick up that prescription, to be able to care for your child, right? And you can see here some statistics of what driving looks like in the state and how people are dependent, especially outside of Greater Boston. We've heard stories during the pandemic of people that work out in the fields that had to walk for hours to get to their work site. And then a couple more hours once they got to the agricultural place, to the actual site where they were able to harvest, you know, the fruits and vegetables that they were collecting so that we could all eat. You can go to the next slide. Another thing that we know and have seen is that this increases safety on the roads for everyone. Why? Because to have a driver's license, you have to pass a driving exam. In addition to that, you need to have your car registered and you need to have insurance. And we want to make sure that everyone has access to these things because folks are already driving on the road, right? And why not improve the safety of everyone by requiring tests and by making sure that folks are able to care for themselves if and when they are involved in any accidents. You can go to the next slide. Oh, is that really everything? Oh my goodness, that went by really fast. Look at that. I thought there was one more, but there we go. So in general, right, we know that this bill is one that addresses and alleviates racial justice, public health, public safety, and economic equity. And This bill had its hearing earlier in June. Testimony is still welcomed. So if y'all would like to do that in support of the bill, we welcome it. And I'm especially looking at you, Maria, since you asked about that earlier, hopeful for y'all to consider that. We love the support. And the bill is currently sitting in the Joint Transportation Committee, waiting to be reported out favorably. This is the second session that the Driving Families Forward Coalition has been in the leadership of trying to get this bill done. Last legislative session was the first one that we were reported favorably out of the Transportation Committee. We're hopeful that that'll be the same in this next session and that we are able to get it done. And I am happy to take any questions. I see Fiona's sharing in the chat box. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had to hire ambulances to get patients from Chelsea to MGH for COVID testing because the only other option was to send potentially contagious people who didn't have driver's license on public transit. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for uplifting and sharing that, Fiona. And my email is there, and I'll also put it in the chat box in case folks have any questions or would like to get involved more.
Great. Thank you so much to all four presenters. I'm sorry I had some issues advancing the slides on that one. So we are going to wrap up with just a moment on how you can get involved in all four of these incredible efforts. Just a point to say, as medical professionals, as practitioners, as people that work in the healthcare field in general, you have a huge value. I always say legislators put an outsized value on people that show up in white coats or with those professional IDs. And so you have a role in, lobbying your institution to endorse legislation, providing expertise for briefings, gathering stories for advocates to share, testifying at hearings and submitting written testimony, writing letters to legislators, including leadership, and meeting with legislators, especially committee chairs. So I'm going to quickly share something different. Just give me one quick moment with how everybody can take action today. Sorry, I thought it was pulled up. There we go. So we are going to put this link in the chat, but have a great, easy way for people to take action real quick. There also are fact sheets for each of the bill included. So ways to call your senator to ask them to reach out to the Senate Ways and Means for the Cover All Kids legislation. Ways to email your legislators about language access, and also ways to submit stories in several different languages, which is really important for a language access bill to have all those languages available. For the Safe Communities Act, there is the hearing you could watch. We also have put together a healthcare practitioner, medical professional letter to the Joint Committee. And we would love for you all to sign and to circulate as far and wide as possible. And then also sending an email to the Joint Committee. For the Work and Family Mobility Act or driver's license, there's an opportunity to send an email to the Joint Committee on Transportation, and also a whole document with other actions to take. Do any of you four have anything additional to say about any of these action items?
Yes, I'd love to say something.
Great, go for it.
I just wanted to say, so you can see that the links are right here in the document, and I think we're going to be sharing, following it up, but I want to particularly, can't see the whole document. Let me just see if I can find it elsewhere. Yeah, what I wanted to just point out, and I think this is probably pretty clear to most people, is these links make it really easy to send an email. Like, they generate an email for you that you can then add your own perspective to, a few lines, one or two, but you don't have to do all that. It makes it super easy. to do that. And not only that, you don't even have to know who your legislators are, because the system will figure it out when you put your address in at the beginning. And the other thing I wanted to say is really, I did want to encourage you to take a look at the healthcare provider letter for the Safe Communities Act. Because it's, I think what we would like, you're in a particularly good position to share it with your colleagues. Take a look at it. If you want to sign on, and there's a link to share it with others as well. And what was the last thing I wanted to mention? Oh yeah, and if you want to watch Dr. Danaher at the hearing, I've noted the minute and the hour and minute where the public health panel is speaking, and that way you can get sort of a front seat view onto how physicians and healthcare providers can make such a difference at a hearing and testify at a hearing. So you'll get, it's just, I think it's just like 10 minutes for the three of them, but take a look.
Great. Anyone else want to add anything, or do we have any questions as we wrap up today?
I'll just say briefly, I put my contact information in the chat, and our coalition has monthly meetings that are open to anybody that's interested in attending, keeping updated. And I'm sure that's similar for a lot of the people who put their emails in the chat as well. So if there is something in particular that you really want to get more involved with, feel free to just send us an email, because we can get you looped in if that's something that you'd like to do.
Great, and I'll add everyone's emails to this action document too, so you have them as a resource. I apologize for not doing that before. Any other questions or comments from anybody? I'm gonna stop sharing.
I just want to say thank you all very much for taking the time to hear about all of these bills. I'm hopeful that you'll take action to support all of them and to also share it with your networks. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and I put it in the chat, the contact information for Suzanne Curry, who's actually the person that leads the bill on health, on our side of Healthcare for All. So you can reach out to me or reach out to her. We'll get the information that you need if you have questions, further questions on Cover All Kids.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I always find this session so informative, just for even understanding the legislative process, which is so opaque. And then, of course, for filling us in on all of the important legislation that is affecting our immigrant patients right now. So I definitely encourage people to take action. We'll send the links out after Migration is Beautiful.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.